Ms. Bailey, could I ask you to complete the roll call so everyone knows who is here?
Yes. Anna Andrzejewski.
Present.
Arvina Martin.
I'm here.
David McLean.
Here.
Betty Banks. Katie Kalashewski.
Here. Present.
Maurice Taylor. Rich Arneson.
Present.
Okay, I'd like to kick it over to Joe Schraven for some notes on our virtual meeting tonight and how it will work.
Welcome to our virtual meeting. We're going to cover a few basic items before beginning. If you lose connection at any point during the meeting, you can reconnect by clicking the link or calling the number in your original email. Members, if you are able, please activate your video and keep it on for the duration of the meeting. Staff, if you are able, please activate your video when you are speaking. The chair, clerk, and tech facilitator are responsible for muting and unmuting committee members. Use the raise hand feature when you'd like to be recognized to speak, ask questions, or request a roll call vote. During any roll call, all panelists will be unmuted briefly. Staff, click raise hand when you are asked a question. Lowering your hand will take you out of the queue. Members of the public who have registered to speak. The name you entered in Zoom must match the name you entered in registration. You will remain muted until called upon. The clerk will tell you when your time is up. After speaking, a member of the body may ask you a question. If you need to share documentation with the board, please send it to the email listed on today's agenda. As a note, IT staff does not currently have access to the City County building. If technical issues arise preventing this virtual meeting from continuing, the Landmarks Commission will reconvene at a later date. Chair, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. The first item on the agenda is Legistar 60672. This is a report from the chair. I wanted to propose that this commission consider adopting the implementation of a new process, which is using a consent agenda. This is something that other boards and commissions in the city of Madison use for items on agendas that are basically sanctioned for approval. And I will ask Ms. Bailey to step in and correct me on some of this. They are recommended for approval, and there's no registrants on the issue. Is that correct, Ms. Bailey?
No registrants wishing to speak.
Correct. Okay, thank you for that correction. This would certainly, I thought about this, that this would certainly save time when we're working in a virtual format, but it's because it is something that is fairly common to other boards and commissions in the city of Madison. I thought it might be something that we would consider adopting for the foreseeable future. The advantage of a consent agenda process is that you can vote on the items listed on the consent agenda as a group rather than going through them one by one. So it would certainly save time. How it works, if someone wants to discuss something that's listed on the consent agenda, that is, if a commissioner would like to remove it from the consent agenda, you simply ask to do so by way of a motion. And if that passes, we remove it from the consent agenda and discuss it separately. So it's a process of streamlining. I think it certainly would help in terms of making our meetings more efficient. So I wanted to raise that as an issue. We've talked about it with the city attorney's office, and there's no reason why we cannot consider this process. So I thought I will open the floor to questions if any commissioners have them. Any concerns the commissioners might have?
And again, just as a reminder, to see the raise hand option, you need to click on participants at the bottom of your Zoom screen to bring up that side panel.
I have the side panel and I'm not seeing anything, Joe.
Okay, just wanted to remind the commission.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So I'd like to vote on this formally so it can be a matter in the record. So I would entertain, if there's no further discussion at this point, I'd entertain a motion. There could, of course, be discussion after we have a motion that's been made and seconded. Okay, Commissioner Arneson.
I'll move approval.
Okay. Commissioner Kalashevsky, I think I unmuted you. No, I did not.
Yes.
Okay. Is that a second?
Yes, it's a second.
Okay. Any further discussion? Okay. Seeing none, I'm going to assume unanimous consent. Is there anyone who objects to this motion? Okay, great. Starting with the next meeting, we will proceed by way of using the consent agenda. Okay, so stay tuned for that. Thank you very much. The next item of business is approval of the minutes from May 4th, 2020. I will need a motion and a second to approve those minutes. Alder Martin?
I'll move approval.
Great. Okay, Commissioner McLean?
Second.
Okay. Is there any further discussion on the minutes? I'll assume unanimous consent. Are there any objections to approving the minutes at this juncture? Okay, that passes. Thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is the period for public comment. This is when a member of the public wants to speak before the commission on an item not on tonight's agenda. Ms. Bailey, are there any individuals registered for public comment?
So we do have one registrant, Michael Engel, who was registered for agenda item number 1. But we had received an email that registrant was for agenda item number 3. So I will leave open the public comment portion of if Michael Engel is on and would like to provide public comment otherwise. I'm not seeing him in the list.
No, there's nobody by that name on the list.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is disclosures and recusals. Are there any members of the Landmarks Commission that need to disclose any relationship to tonight's items or recuse themselves from voting for any of the items? Seeing no raised hands in the box or seeing people gesturing wildly, I'm going to move on to our first public hearing item. This is item number 3 on the agenda, Legistar 59706, a project at 817821 Williamson Street involving the demolition of an existing commercial structure, construction of a new 3-story mixed-use structure, and also a land combination in the 3rd Lake Ridge Historic District, the 6th Aldermanic District. I'll turn it over to Ms. Bailey for a staff report.
Okay, so you should be seeing the presentation here. Okay, there we go. We have, these are for 3 certificates of appropriateness related to the subject property. There's the standards for demolition of an existing structure, combining of the lots that are currently addressed as 817 and 821 Williamson into a single parcel, and construction of the new building. For history of the property, the existing building that is there was constructed in 1966. It was constructed for a company called the Gilman Press, which is not to be confused with an older historic Gilman Press. There's a building also on the east side with the name on that particular building. But in 1981, this then became the home for the Madison Teachers Union. At the time of construction of the building that is currently addressed as 817 Williamson, it actually crossed the underlying lot line, but at that point in time, we did not require property owners to resolve those underlying lot lines. But as part of current building code, any new construction that crosses the underlying lot line would need to consolidate the lot and make it a single parcel. For the staff reports that you have from when this originally came in for a March meeting, you see the discussion of the standards for demolition. The staff believes that this meets standards for demolition. The subject property is has a structure that was built well outside the period of significance for Third Lake Ridge. It does not appear that it has significance in its own right in order to be eligible for a landmark, and it looks like it is eligible for that criteria. Additionally, for the certificate of appropriateness for land combination, there are a variety of parcel sizes within 200 feet and also within that particular historic district. And the proposed new parcel size would be compatible with similar lot sizes in the vicinity. The other applicable standards are related to new construction. And so, I'm sorry, and I put that wrong, and it should be 41.236, not 41.18. Third Lake Ridge standards for new structures for mixed use and commercial use. So with this, we're looking at a context of historic resources within 200 feet. And the standard there is that the new construction shall be visually compatible with those in terms of gross volume, height, proportion of rhythm of solids and voids, the materials used on the street facade. Third Lake Ridge has a strong emphasis on street facades, design of the roof, and rhythm of buildings and masses and spaces. So what we have up here, we have some images from the proposal that includes some of the properties that were identified as part of the visual compatibility study area that staff provided to the applicant. So for these particular resources, these buildings are more of the commercial nature, located along Williamson. You have a couple of buildings, you'll see right there in the middle, 831 Williamson. From the street facade appears to be a flat roof building. It's actually a false front and it's a gable roof behind it. But from the street facade, it appears as a flat roof building. For the map that you have there on the right-hand side of the screen, 831 is also interesting because there is the older portion of the building that projects forward, but then behind it, forming a T, is a more recent addition that provides something that ends up being a much larger building as a whole, for all that there is a older portion that projects up towards the street. Here we have some renderings from the applicant's proposal. For the staff report that was issued last week, staff's recommendation was that to mitigate the visual compatibility of the gross volume of the building and also the height, that the bay that is on the south side, which you'll see on the right-hand side of these pictures, be stepped back approximately 8 feet to be comparable to the setback for the bay on the north side, or there on the left. And so what you have is a central projecting bay that is more in line with the width of buildings that you see on the historic resources within the vicinity. And by vicinity, I mean within the 200 feet visual compatibility area. You'll also see a little bit better on this rendering here. So for the rest of the building that is located well behind, there's also a separation with the balconies that end up making it look more like it is attached by a hyphen. And so you have the rest of the mass of the building located well behind, something somewhat similar to the setup that you have with 831 Williamson. And then, of course, a rear view for what is the addition part there on the back. For visual compatibility, and reading through the proposal, looking at the standards, and looking at the context of the area, the standards are not about being identical to the historic resources, but about being visually compatible. So there's a look of the corridor down Williamson there, but I was also looking at the newer building that was also apparently constructed by the applicant. And adjacent to the historic resources that are also part of this visual compatibility area. That new building is a larger building. It is taller, but it is of a height in a way that it is visually compatible without being overwhelming to the historic resources in the vicinity. So staff recommendation remains the same, that the certificates of appropriateness, that those standards appear to be met for the demolition and for the land combination. And I had a condition for the certificate of appropriateness for new construction the setback for the southwestern bay on the street facade be set back approximately 8 feet. And the applicant has provided new renderings that show what that would look like.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Bailey. I want to go ahead and open the public hearing on this item, and I assume we have registrants for this item. Ms. Bailey?
We do indeed. So would you like to hear from the applicant, or would you like to hear from members of the public next?
Let's hear from the applicant per our usual process first.
So we have Kevin Burrow here to speak on behalf of the proposal.
Okay, Kevin, you should be unmuted.
Okay, thank you very much. I assume you can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, Heather did an excellent job with regards to presenting the newer images that were submitted for this application. So at this point, I don't have any additional information to add to the presentation, but would be available to answer questions and to help clarify with regards to the architectural design, the overall scale and massing of the building, and any questions with regards to proximity or any other aspects of the project. So I guess in light of trying to be efficient with time for this evening, I will just be available to answer questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any commissioners that wish to ask questions of the applicant at this time? Please please raise your hand using the raise your hand function if you do. Okay, I have a question. You saw the staff report, Mr. Burrow. You saw the staff recommendation about the 8-foot setback of that other section?
Yes, I did. And we, as was mentioned by Heather, we have updated the plan to see if that would work. And it was successful with regards to maintaining the character that we wanted to achieve and the overall efficiency of the building. So we are acceptable of that condition.
Thank you. Any other questions for the applicant from the body, please? Okay, seeing none. Mr. Burrow, please remain on the line, obviously. Questions may arise in the course of discussion.
Yes, thank you.
Ms. Bailey.
First registrant from the public is Stephen Ohlson, in opposition, wishing to speak.
Okay, Stephen, you should be unmuted.
Justine?
Okay, we can hear you.
Okay, good evening, everyone. My name's Steve Ohlson. I live on the block that the building is proposed for, at the end of the block on South Patterson Street. In my view, this proposal is simply too large for this location. The building mimics warehouse and industrial properties in the area, but that appearance is just like tinsel or glitter sprinkled as disguise to sneak a warehouse-sized building into an area of much smaller residential properties, and also to be able to place a property out at the sidewalk like a commercial entity when it is really a residential building. Approving this design is just going to set off speculation all the way down Williamson Street. When Brandon Cook first appeared before the Market Neighborhood Association Preservation and Development Committee last year in July on this to present this matter, he admitted extensively to us what he really wanted to put on this lot is a 5-story building. His goal here is not to fit into the historic district, but just to extract the greatest number of rents that he can from the property. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Do any commissioners have questions of Mr. Ohlson? Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Ohlson. Ms. Bailey.
Linda Leonards, registered in opposition, wishing to speak.
Hi, this is Linda Leonards. I pretty much said most of what I wanted to say in the letter that was sent, but I would like to emphasize a few things, one of which is that this often gets the south side as compared to the north side of the street. They're entirely different historically. The north side was more industrial, had industrial buildings because of the railroad. The south side had little merchants. This building is over 4 times larger than anything else in the historic visual area. And yes, there isn't a mathematical formula to be using, but it does give some indication of how large this building is. And the height is approximately 13 feet higher than any other building on the block, and it's going to be set right at the sidewalk, as are the other commercial properties. But that additional height is going to be readily visible, and the little corner setbacks don't do a whole lot to reduce that height. We've been talking about precedents of other buildings. Ms. Bailey mentioned 831 Willie, which has a warehouse attached to the back. I don't think that's a valid comparison. That warehouse was built in 1965. It was in the period before things came before landmarks, and I don't think it's anything that would garner approval at this point in time. The comparison was made to 801 Williamson, now 803 Williamson. The Landmarks Commission specifically limited that as part of its approval to 33 feet. Part of the discussion was that this was a corner property that often has more prominence. Even despite that, some of the commissioners expressed as reflected in the minutes that the building's too big. A more appropriate comparison would be 739 Williamson, which is a mid-block infill building. That building has a main portion that is 30 feet wide, and then it has the little corners cut off at the sides for a total of 46 feet. So we're comparing, if we cut off the corners of both buildings, 739 was 30 feet, this one's 42. 739 had 3 sections to that center 30 feet. This one just has one section to the center 42 feet. 739 has a 3rd-story setback. There's no 3rd-story setback here. Part of what was required for 739 was a living wall going up the elevator shaft, and that was done to keep the illusion that there was space there, that there's green, and the commissioners felt that it was looked like two separate buildings with that wall. But despite that wall, the staff at that time, if staff said with the wall it's okay, but if it's not compatible with the rhythm of masses and spaces if there wasn't that wall. So that wall had essentially blocked things into about 2 14 feet, 10 to 12 feet sections. And without that wall, it wouldn't have been compatible. The staff also for 739 found, even with the articulation, that the building reads as one mass. And so we're concerned about the size of the mass on that particular building. So I think I look at the comparisons, and I think they support the idea that this is too large of a building. And I would like to make one I'll let it go. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Leonards. Do any members of the body have any questions of Ms. Leonards? Okay, seeing none, thank you. And we acknowledge also that you sent in a letter that is in the record. Ms. Bailey.
Scott Thornton, registered in support, wishing to speak.
Okay, Scott, you're unmuted.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for hearing the public on this one tonight. I live at 1104 Jennifer Street and have been a resident of the neighborhood for 20 years now. I support this development. I attended the city meeting that Alder Rummel had scheduled last month, and it was well attended by the neighborhood. I thought that the comments out of that meeting were very positive towards the building. I don't think that it is too big. I do think, given where it is on the block, that it fits in. And I kind of think back over to the 1000 block, where in the middle of the block you have Nature's Bakery building on that side of the the street, which is also much taller than the surrounding houses and butts up to the sidewalk, although not as wide. I think what they've done on the corners of the property and how they've treated the driveway to cut back on the massing really improved the building. And I support the staff, and I appreciate the staff's understanding of the standards and the ability for this project to get a certificate of appropriateness and move forward. So I think that's all I have to say. I know that Brandon does very good work in the neighborhood. He builds quality buildings. He's not coming in and building buildings and then flipping them over. So I think that this building will be a quality building and will be an asset to the neighborhood for quite some time. So thank you.
Thank you. Any commissioners have questions of Mr. Thornton? Okay, seeing none. Thank you very much. Ms. Bailey?
Gary Tipler, registered in opposition, wishing to speak.
Gary, you should have a prompt on your screen. There you
Thank
go.
you.
Okay.
Yeah, I had written a note as well, and my concern is that the building, can you show a picture of the building again, please? I don't see it from my screen. I only see my name. That's it. And a little something on the right-hand side. So this format is slightly different from the last Zoom I've seen, last few. I feel that the mass of the building is too big. Certainly the styling, I like the front of the building, but I don't particularly think that the mass of the building is appropriate for this block. Everything that was said previously by other speakers, I would agree with, including the fact that Brandon's, I think, is good for his word on the development proposals that he has created, and he does quality work. However, my critique has been in massive scale on this. The fact that my critique on not meeting what I interpret as being Landmarks Commission criteria and zoning mass and so on is based on the fact that this kind of approval, in fact, still requires, even though Landmarks is a zoning overlay, it still requires, according to the zoning ordinance, conditional uses. And the conditional uses on the square footage and the fact that non-residential uses do not occupy at least 75% of the ground frontage, floor frontage, means it does have to go to Plan Commission. So one little green flag after another, and the thing gets built. I prefer to see a smaller building. I prefer to see the site developed, but I think this is simply too large. I'm concerned that the spillover from this is scientific or not. People will see a bigger building on a lot than they understood was possible. Speculation is going to occur. It doesn't need any knowledge or basis for fact. Speculation occurs when there's some kind of a sense of approval for it, and it is a destabilizing thing. We've experienced it a couple of waves of it in the last 23 years that I've been here, and certainly since I've seen the changes occur since I was involved in creating the district back in the 1970s. So these are concerns of mine: stability, longevity, good health for the residential area, increased improvements, and so on. So that's the end of my statement. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Gary. Do any commissioners have any questions for Mr. Tipler? Okay, seeing none. Thank you, Gary. All right, Ms. Bailey?
Rachel Bauer, registered in support, wishing to speak.
Rachel, you're unmuted.
Oh, thank you. I'm not sure if I can be heard or not.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. That's great. Thank you so much. So I am a resident and property owner of the adjacent property at 825 Williamson Street. And I am in support of this building. I have developed property myself. I have lived in Madison for 20 years. I have not done so in Madison. I have done that outside of the city of Madison. I have to say that I love the city and I love what happens here. But I am constantly flabbergasted that there are developers who are up against these mighty hurdles, largely, coming from people who have never developed a property, have never put their hard-earned money, time, and effort into actually owning these properties and to bringing great projects to the city of Madison. So I'm frustrated to hear of a lot of the things that I've been hearing. This is not the only project I've heard this on. I'm frustrated that Madison should be a city that is competing with other great cities. We're a top place to live, and yet we want to see smaller buildings with more parking spaces and fewer residents. And I just can't wrap my head around the silliness of that. It makes zero sense. Brandon is a great developer. This is a great project. This is the right project. This is a lot that needs to be developed. And I just ask you to use your common sense when you're looking at what and who is arguing about what should be there. I'm 100% in support of this project. And again, I live at the property right next door. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bauer. Do any members of the commission have questions for this registrant? Okay, seeing none. Thank you very much.
So additionally, we have Brandon Cook is registered in support, available for questions. John Martins, registered in opposition, not wishing to speak, available to answer questions. Eric Welch, registered in support. I'm sorry, did I say John Martins was in opposition? Yes, okay. Eric Welch, registered in support, not wishing to speak, available for questions. Mary Ann McBride, registered in opposition, not wishing to speak. Ross Wannenberg, sorry if I mangled your name, registered in opposition, not wishing to speak. Helen Schneider, in opposition, not wishing to speak. Jack Keir, registered in support, not wishing to speak. Joy Newman, registered in opposition, not wishing to speak. Pilar Gomez Ibanez, registered in opposition, not wishing to speak.
Okay, and it should be noted also that we received extensive written correspondence as well on this item, and that will be in the record as well, correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right, before I close the public hearing, I'd like to ask one more time if any members of the commission have questions for any of the registrants, keeping in mind, please, that given the virtual format, it's much harder to have them call back as we often do in our face-to-face meetings. Okay, I'm going to attempt to unmute Commissioner McLean. I think, David, I've got you unmuted.
Thank you. It's just some general questions about the building's massing and siting. There's a couple things I was looking at relative to the other properties on the block, 801 as well, relative to the properties across the street. Noticing that it seems like the north side of the block is, as was mentioned earlier, much more industrial, much more urban. I mean, the whole thing's urban, obviously, in the city, but the south side seems to have more setback from the sidewalk to the building facades. And I was curious if that was ever considered for this one. It looks like 801 has like a foot or two from the sidewalk setback, and it sort of relieves, I think, the tension between the residential structures and this commercial building might help a little bit with some of the concerns people are having. You can get it back a little bit. And I also noticed that the second floor elevation is significantly higher than third floor elevation, as well as a roof deck for the third floor space. And I'm assuming that has something to do with the sloping of the site, the back end being uphill a little bit. I've also seen the use of retaining walls in the back. I'm assuming that is as well because of the sloping of the site. So I'm kind of wondering if there's a possibility to shorten that first floor a little bit. And I know in the elevations they have it listed as first floor and lobby. So when I say first floor, I guess I'm lumping the lobby into that definition as well for this conversation. So between the elevation, 17 feet for the second floor deck, and everything else is about 11 feet deck to deck. So it's another, I guess the lobby gives an additional 6 feet. Is there a way to make the building a little shorter at that lobby level, first floor level, however you want to call it, and sort of, I know that would mean the building goes back a little bit further on the south end as well, which would mean a little bit lower in the retaining wall. I understand that. But if a retaining wall is already in use to hold back the earth to get that building back there, I was curious if it couldn't come down a little further yet. So I don't know if the developer or designer has thought about any of those issues.
Great, thank you. So Mr. Cook or Mr. Burrow, please.
Okay, I have unmuted both you guys. You should have a prompt on your screen, Brandon. Kevin, it looks like you're unmuted. Yep. All right, both.
Okay, I can start to answer this question. With regards to the initial comment of a setback, we are actually set back similar to 803, where we are back from the sidewalk about 2 feet. So that has been accomplished. You're correct in that there is a sloping site, grade is uphill towards the back of the property. There's an existing retaining wall back there right now. And what we're doing is blending our second floor level in to the top of that existing retaining wall where grade currently exists in the back property. So that does actually set the second floor up approximately 6 feet higher than it would traditionally be set, but that's so we can have an exit or out the back onto the existing grade because there are existing trees in the back of the property as well that we are trying to maintain. So that you're correct in with the additional 6 feet does raise first floor to be taller. We're entering at the sidewalk grade. So the commercial space is at sidewalk grade and the building lobby is also at sidewalk grade. And then there's a small flight of steps up to get to what would be the first floor level on the main building. So we cannot push the building back any further based on the existing vegetation and creating a rear yard of 20 feet, which we want to maintain as we currently have shown on the plan. And also, like I said, it maintains the existing vegetation in the back of the property.
Regarding the vegetation, looking at the site plan now, with that retaining wall going in that close to the trees, you think they will be salvageable? I've seen a lot of trees that lose a taproot with construction close like that, and the tree's dead within a year or two afterwards. So a lot of gymnastics happen for nothing, I guess, basically.
Right. No, it is our desire that it should be able to be safe because it's currently sitting uphill of an existing retaining wall.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Commissioner Arneson, did you have a question?
Rich, you're still muted.
I'm sorry, I'm not unmuted. It was mostly answered. But maybe Kevin could answer. What is the general, given the floor structure, what ceiling height are you trying to maintain for the commercial space? And I guess for the residential too, given these floor to floors.
Sure. For the residential, we're trying to maintain a 9-foot ceiling, which would be the case for the back half of the building where first floor, second floor, and third floor is stacked. On the front of the building, then the commercial space does have the opportunity for 14 to 15 foot tall ceilings, depending upon the use of that space.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. I see that Alder Rummel, the District 6 Alder, is in attendance. Alder Rummel, would you like to speak in relation to this item? I just wanted to make sure I could invite you to do so.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Nice to see you. So some of the letters in the app, people speaking to talked about previous meetings. I did have one on April 23rd. It was my first Zoom meeting. So it Kevin in planning helped me, and it was a lot of good attendance. And I think, as people have mentioned, I think there was general appreciation for the design of the building, but there were lots of questions about setbacks and the rear and the proximity to rear properties and all kinds of things. So I don't know that it was just like, oh, everybody loved it. I mean, I think it was, the design looks nice, but, and then there were lots of questions. So, and I think you got some really good feedback in your letters. And the one that really strikes me is, well, the first one that really strikes me is we don't often see on the south side the combination of two lots. And I think that's the kind of, what's the basic contradiction here with people feeling that it's too big, because, maybe there are other things that have happened, but not in the recent past. All the examples that were given were, things that had fit into a single lot. And I think when you get to two lots and then the width gets wider, then you do run into the disconnect with the width and the facades that are nearby. So I think that's a legitimate concern, and I'm not convinced that just even the staff recommendation of setting back 8 feet of the northeast bay really solves it. I mean, I think it should be more even, but I don't know that the middle part is still pretty wide. And it's not my job to design the building, but it does seem wide. And the other thing I thought that was brought up in the comments from Ms. Leonards was the difference of the south and the north side. And I think we have had an approach to redevelopment with that kind of information in mind. And a mid-block infill development is a lot different than a corner one on the south side, like 801, or even things across the street that we have gone through, like say at the corner of where Fuegos is, Patterson. And so I'm not quite sure they're there yet. I think there's sort of, I appreciate the traditional design because that's kind of what I like, but I think having it be so much larger and higher is something that we need to discuss. Now, I know people had mentioned, at least some people had mentioned, the flat roof versus the gabled, and I admit to not being so hard, having a hard concern about that, but I think the point is that if you have a flat roof, the thing that was kind of interesting to me about 739 is it has a flat roof, but there's a design element that's angled. So it kind of speaks to the peaked and gabled roofs without necessarily having one. And I'm not suggesting that should happen. I'm just pointing out that I think the question of a flat roof in a more modern building is one that deserves some more discussion. So at this point, I kind of a little bit thinking it needs more work. And I look forward to hearing what you all have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Rummel. All right. Before I close the public hearing, I'm sure the commission will have a debate about this project once I close the public hearing. But if anyone has any questions for the alder or any of the registrants, I would appreciate it if you would use the raise your hand function now to ask those questions. Okay. Seeing none, no one's gesticulating madly. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing and ask the commissioners we're going to now discuss the project. I can entertain a motion, but I imagine there will be more discussion. This would also be a time to ask more clarification questions with regards to the staff report. So I will look for the raise your hand function. Okay. Miss Kalashevsky. Trying to unmute you.
Yes.
There we go.
I agree with Alder Rummel is that it's a nice first or early pass at the building, but I do think that it is too large for the site, particularly with what's around it. I heard the applicant talk about how they're matching the setback of one building, which is nice, but there are lots of buildings in the area, and I don't think he said the address of the two buildings that it's right next to. It would be nicer to get it set back a little bit more and potentially have it more stepped in the front. I understand that that takes away square footage and living space. However, the facade is just too dominating for that side, particularly to the buildings that are on that block. And I agree with Mr. Tipler that this just potentially opens up some issues moving forward in a district we've already talked about has some kind of major issues with infill. So those are my 2 cents.
Okay, thank you. Other commissioners? Nobody's raised. Oh, there we go. There's a raising of the hand. All right. Commissioner McLean.
Sorry, I'm a little slow with that mouse click sometimes.
Me too.
Skips around too much. I mean, I agree as well. The first impression I had going through it with the 2 houses side by flanking it just seems like it's just way too proud, I guess, to be sited where it is. I get the 801 being on the corner a little bit. It's sort of striking its own presence where this one is being flanked by buildings very different than it is. And I'm not sure if stepping back the front would help. I'm not sure if more articulation in the front would help or just bringing the whole building back. But it does seem like it's way too proud, I think, for that location at the moment. I would appreciate to see, I guess, at least one other rendition showing some attempt to try and scale that back somehow. I'm not sure what the answer is. Hopefully that there's some creativity there. They come up with something.
So Commissioner McLean, in terms of speaking to, and I realize it's hard in this virtual format when we're looking at a screen and we're trying to toggle between that and staff reports and our standards. But in terms of what you and Commissioner Kalashevsky were talking about, you're still talking largely in the realm of the facade of the building. Am I correct in understanding that? Or are you dealing with gross volume? Those are different items under 41.236 A and B. And so I just want to be clear for the record what you're speaking to, if you're talking about height or if you're talking about building mass.
Kind of, well, thinking a little bit of both. It's the mass itself that brings it so close to the street, of course. And I will say too, though, they did do a nice job on the parking garage side by breaking the mass down and setting that back and having the access there. I'm not sure if they had a choice or if that's all they had. So it helped to bring some of the front facade a little narrower, obviously bringing the mass a little bit less at the street. But the height, I'm looking at one of the perspectives, one of the last couple of slides, and it just, between the height and the mass, it just looks overwhelming, I think. I'm not sure at this point if there's one better or worse than the other.
Okay. Thank you. Just trying to give clarity both to the applicant and the public, as well as speak to our standards. So thank you. Thank you. Okay, I see Alder Rummel has her hand up.
Yeah, I do.
I unmuted you, I think.
Thank you. I was taking a look at the recent staff report, and when you look at the 200 feet thing and you imagine that center parcel just mostly being filled in, it really just doesn't really fit the gross volume of that. Just seems way out of scale to what surrounds it. And I get that a new building is going to be bigger, a little bigger than, before, but this is like taking 2 parcels and then filling, except for the drive aisle and a little bit side setback. Well, and there's a rear setback, but basically filling up most of the usable space that can be built on. So I think it's both gross volume and height, back to the chair's question. So I wanted just to weigh in on that. Thanks.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And for members of the public following along, we're looking at a standard for specific to the Third Lake Historic District that talks about any new structures on parcels. We look within a 200-foot wide visual area of visual compatibility, and that is specific to that district. And that's what we're talking about. So I just wanted to clarify. I believe Ms. Kalashevsky, hold on. Okay, you're unmuted.
Yes, just clarifying that I was not clear enough. Also, I am also objecting to the height and gross volume. Both of them kind of together are the issues I see with the standards and what's currently being proposed.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. I appreciate it. Okay, Commissioner Arneson, if I press unmute 3 times, it might work. All right, I think, let's see, did that do it? Yes.
I mean, I'm generally in favor of this. Which might not be a surprise, but I think we should keep in mind that the staff report recommends approval. I think we need to look at what is there now, which is a really horrible. Oh, my battery's running low. You know, a 1-story 60s building with a surface parking lot. You know, I think this is a much nicer, would be a much nicer building than what is there now. And I guess when, you know, it's not to talk, and maybe we can get Kevin back on, but you know, the idea that you can just shrink the building 10%, you know, architecture doesn't work that way. You know, you can't just say, we'll make it 5 feet lower without completely redesigning the whole thing, and then you're maybe down to 2 stories. So I don't know. I'm not opposed to trying to see if the team can come up with something that is a little less intrusive. I agree it is pretty prominent on the street, but it's difficult to make those kind of changes, or at least perhaps the kind of change that would maybe satisfy some of the commissioners, because I think the changes would be incremental. The one thing I would ask, I guess, is this: either the commissioners or the team would be: is there an opportunity to step back the 3rd floor on Williamson Street, and maybe that would help. You know, you're certainly giving up leasable square footage, but maybe it's, you know, maybe it could still work.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Arneson.
Chair, if I just might interrupt for just 1 second. The unmute process, it's actually like a 2-step process. So once you click unmute, you only need to click once. They have to permit the unmute on their end. So that's probably where the delay is.
Cool. Awesome.
Thanks.
So just adding a few more seconds to our process. Okay. On that note, Mr. Burrow and Mr. Cook are still here if they could address Mr. Arneson's comments if they want to.
Okay. Brandon, you are unmuted, and Kevin, you are also unmuted.
Thank you.
I appreciate the sentiment, Mr. Arneson. With regards to the overall layout of the building, we could look at stepping the 3rd floor back, although what we have in front is a studio apartment and a 1-bedroom, which are already small in scale. So we don't have the additional square footage that we typically would have, say, converting a 2-bedroom down to a 1-bedroom to allow the step back. So it would be limited opportunity is basically the best way to answer that. And then in regards to the overall siting of the building, I did state that, yes, 803 is currently just set back 2 feet, but also is the other commercial building, 831, I believe, is the number, is also set on the sidewalk. It is the commercial building that has a warehouse behind it. So we feel that we are not the one lone anomaly in the middle of the block, as there is another one just 2 doors down from us.
Okay. Mr. Arneson, did you have a follow-up or?
Yeah. So you could step it back, but you'd essentially lose 2 units. Is that, or is there something else that would happen?
Yeah, we would we would certainly lose at least one unit, possibly both.
Okay, just FYI, I'm going to switch to my phone here, so I'm going to leave and come back. That's okay.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Burrow and Mr. Cook, is there anything else you wanted to say in response to that?
I do not have anything further.
Okay. Stay on the line, please. I'd like to ask if any of the commissioners, especially those that have previously spoken with concerns about the building, have any questions for the project team as well about things that they were interested in seeing should this come back to us, if that happens.
Okay.
Okay. All right, Commissioner McLean.
Am I good?
Yep.
Again, still looking at that perspective, it's there's something about the second to third floor transition or lack thereof. I think if maybe they focus some detail in that area, that might help a little bit. I know it doesn't actually do anything to the massing, but as we all know, lots of things are about perspective as well, not always, I guess, objective, I suppose. But they have, so just kind of throwing that out there, because it'd be nice to see something happen to it to if not necessarily bring it down, give the illusion, say I guess for lack of better terms, that upper belt line that's running along the transom of the third floor windows, would that make something like that make more sense lower as opposed to pushing that belt line up so high, if that makes any sense? Again, trying to work with perspectives and proportions. And it might just be something that simple. It would be nice to see, I guess, a little variation to see if it is something that might make it a bit more successful. And that, coupled with stepping back the side a little bit further as well, like Ms. Bailey had mentioned earlier, might help also. And maybe bringing those two sides back more similar would create an opportunity for a different detail at that second to third floor transition on the street facade. Just throwing that out there.
Okay, does the project team have any comments or thoughts?
We would certainly be willing to look at some options if it was decided that we needed to come back.
I also wanted to just briefly, while we have you on the line, Ms. Bailey made a point in the staff report speaking specifically to the width of the proposed project, that it was larger than the width of similar buildings within the district. But also she made a point about, projects do not have to be identical, they have to be compatible. So this would be a time, again, looking to our standards. 41.236 talks about the rhythm of solids and voids and sort of the distribution of elements along the facade. So if any commissioners have comments about that, this might be a good time to raise them. Seeing no raised hands in the box. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Burrow and Mr. Cook.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right.
Chair, if I could interrupt for some additional information related to the building siting for properties within the vicinity. If I can go ahead and share screen. So what I've got, are you guys seeing a Sanborn map?
We're seeing ourselves again.
Oh, there we go. Okay, here we go. Technology is awesome. So what I have pulled up here is the 1908 Sanborn map, which shows the block in question. And so you see the properties have shifted around. The width of the proposed parcel would be the same as the width of the parcels that have historically been on this block. But you will notice that while the parcels were of that width, most properties developed two separate buildings on those lots. For the setback of the properties, you'll see most of these residential buildings originally had porches that spanned the full front of the building, and a lot of those don't anymore. And so that ends up giving the impression of them being much further set back than they had been originally when those porches had been located there. But you'll see some similar, being fairly close to the front property line of some buildings on the block. But then I would say also take into consideration that for the smaller buildings, they once had porches.
Okay. Thank you. Any commissioners have questions about the historical lot sizes and lot lines? That was very helpful. Thank you. All right. So in the interest of moving us along, we have, and I wanted to ask Ms. Bailey before we proceed, we have essentially 3 parts of this, which I am guessing we could vote on together or separate. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So just to remind the commissioners, we have a demolition of an existing commercial structure, the land combination, I should say, which we were just speaking about or around, and then the project itself, correct? Am I correct on that? The construction project. Okay. So at this point, I do not see any raised hands for further discussion. So this would mean that we're moving towards a motion. Ms. Bailey, do you have anything else that might guide us in terms of how we're proceeding that I could be missing?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I will entertain a motion, or Ms. Bailey, do you want to speak about, I think we have the range of different things we're talking about. If there is not support for a positive motion, what might these commissioners wish to do at this point?
Sure. So yes, you could take all of these together. You could break them out separately. You're talking about a certificate of appropriateness for the demolition, a certificate of the appropriateness for the land combination, and a separate COA for the new construction. If you don't want to say yay or nay to any of these particular motions, you could also provide detailed feedback and refer the that particular certificate of appropriateness consideration to a future meeting.
And when might our future meetings be at this juncture?
We are currently operating at trying to have one meeting every 4 to 6 weeks while we are hosting virtual meetings. The next meeting that we have approval for would be July 13th.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. So, commissioners, you have your options before you. So I will look to the raising of the hand functions to entertain one or more motions. Ms. Kalashevsky.
I will move approval of the demolition of the building. I don't think any of us have any issues with that. And I currently don't have any issues with land combination, but then I move approval of the demolition and the land combination, but I move to refer a COA for the new building for updated project plans.
The third, should we separate the third and just move on the first 2 items?
It sounds like there's room for additional discussion on the third item, so that is probably prudent.
So okay. If it's friendly, we could do approval of the land combination and the demolition as your motion.
Yes, I'm fine with that.
Okay, thank you. All right, so there's a motion on the table. Commissioner McLean.
Second.
Great. All right, any further discussion? To be clear again on the motion, we're approving the land combination and the demolition. That is what the motion states. Any further discussion on this item? Okay, I'm going to assume unanimous consent. Are there any objections? Seeing none, this motion passes unanimously. Okay, Ms. Kalashevsky, can I unmute you again for to read into the record the next part of what you were talking about earlier, which in relation to the approval of the project, the new construction.
Yeah, I move referral of the COA for new construction to give them an opportunity to take in our comments and determine what they can do for that, the height and volume of the building.
Okay,
and David's comments regarding decoration on the front facade.
And this is specifically in relation to, I don't have it in front of me, 41.236, items A and B.
Yes, that sounds
mass and height specifically. Okay.
Yes, A and B.
All right. Thank you very much. So we have a motion on the table. Do I have a second? Alder Martin.
I will second.
Okay, thank you. All right, any further discussion on this motion, which is referring this, I assume, to a future meeting without a specific date, but I wanted Ms. Bailey to be clear about our timing of our scheduled meetings. Okay, any further discussion? I'm looking for little hands. Okay. Ms. Bailey, I think we might want to do a roll call for this. I think that would probably be in order.
Sure. Arvina Martin. Oh, sorry. Could everybody unmute?
I don't know how to do that. Okay, I think we're good.
You got, yeah, okay.
Thank you.
David McLean.
Aye.
Katie Kalashewski.
Aye.
Rich Arneson.
Aye.
Okay, at 4 votes, motion passes.
Okay. All right, thank you. So we will be seeing this again, hopefully, at a future meeting date to be determined. I want to thank the project team and also the members of the public who came out to speak on both sides of this project. And I also want to really commend everyone for sticking to the 3-minute limit. It was really great discussion. Okay. Anything, Ms. Bailey, have I done everything correctly on this item?
Yes.
Okay, great. So our next item on the agenda, item 4, this is Legistar 60396, a public hearing project 7 to 11 North Pinckney involving the demolition of a designated Madison landmark in the 4th Aldermanic District. Ms. Bailey, I will turn it over to you for a brief report.
So we looked at the variance request for this particular proposal last time. The Landmarks Commission issued the public interest variance on the May 4th meeting. And so that fulfills the requirements mostly for the demolition standards for 7 to 11 North Pinckney. To go into the history a little bit here, one item that was not in the previous list of history was that 7 North Pinckney was the local branch location for UMOS, which dealt with, and still deals with, providing services and representation advocacy for migrant workers. Applicable standards. Again, most of the requirements for the demolition standards are met by the public interest variance, but there are 2 items that we need to look at related to the building for optional conditions of approval for the demolition. One is about the designation of the building as a landmark and whether any new structure compatible with scale of massive buildings within 200 feet. Once the building is demolished, it would, in essence, no longer be a landmark building. So that particular criteria ends up being fulfilled with the demolition. But there's also built in a optional condition for additional documentation. So staff believes that the standards for granting the certificate of appropriateness are met and recommends Landmarks Commission approve the request with the following conditions: exterior and interior photographic documentation of the structure and also photos of the demolition with images labeled and linked to a photographic key to be electronically submitted to the preservation planner, and that would be included in the preservation file for this property as part of really kind of closing out the preservation file. Also, this property is located within the boundary of the former Capitol effigy mound site that unfortunately is long since gone, but it still requires per state mandate that they secure a request to disturb permit, and that would require archaeological monitoring and archaeological report to be filed with the state. So I'm also recommending that a copy of that archaeological report be submitted to the city for inclusion in the preservation file. And then upon completion of the demolition of the structure, that the applicant or the property owner submit a request to rescind the landmark designation of the property. This proposal wouldn't meet the criteria for rescission of a landmark designation until the demolition has happened. But also with the way the current standards read for rescinding a landmark designation, only the property owner can submit a request for rescission. That's all I have.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Repositioned a little bit, so I got to make sure my camera is working. All right. I want to open the public hearing, and I assume we have registrants on this item as well. Ms. Bailey. Oh, you're muted. Hold on.
Sorry.
Okay.
We have Brad Binkowski representing the project and wishing to speak.
Okay, Brad, you should be unmuted.
Great, thank you very much. We appreciate the action taken in the last Landmarks Commission. We've reviewed the conditions that the staff has recommended, and we're happy to comply with all of them. So, we certainly intend to document and will cooperate with staff in documenting the photographic photographs of what exists right now. Comply with the architectural request and with item number 3. So we have no issues with the notification or with the conditions that were attached.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Binkowski. Do any members of the body have any questions for the applicant? Okay, seeing no raised hands, you might want to stick around as future questions may arise. Ms. Bailey.
Alex Saludos, registered in support and wishing to speak.
You're unmuted. Go ahead.
Just wanted to confirm my sound is on.
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. To put the bottom line first, I support approval of this certificate of appropriateness, including the first 2 conditions in the staff report, deletion of the 3rd condition, the applicant submitting a request to rescind landmark designation, and the addition of a condition that the facade be, the Ohlson and Verhusen facade be restored, rehabilitated, or reconstructed to the Secretary of Interior standards and subject to the review of the Landmarks Commission. First, I think we can agree that facade-dectomies are not good historic preservation. Let's get that out of the way. I agree they're not an ideal situation. That said, given the circumstances, what I've proposed is the best outcome for the city and historic preservation. The restored facade, which embodies a significant portion of the historical and cultural value, will be retained in a location and setting that embodies important elements of its historic value in a location on a retail block on the Capitol Square. The facade will be restored in an authentic manner as possible. There's fabulous photos of the building when originally built that can be used as resource material, and it's a huge and positive improvement to its current condition. It will be restored using standards that are the best practices in historic preservation. Based on my conversations with the developer is ready, willing, and able to do this. Objections that I've heard include is a facade-dectomy. It's not true historic preservation. It's being moved. It's not technically preservation. It does not meet the Secretary of the Interior standards for a landmark, and it's a salvage job, not the purview of the Landmarks Commission. I understand the objections and have some legitimate concerns about them. And the position recommended in the staff report is a change from city policy and past precedent by the city. And it doesn't best serve historic preservation or the community by restoring the facade of this important city landmark. Let's talk about the facade-dectomy, and that it's not true historic preservation. It's not technically historic preservation. That's a purist point of view. Historic preservation isn't binary. And the City of Madison precedent and policy on this are more pragmatic and support restoration of the facade and moving it 40 feet and maintaining the landmark status. I call your attention to the Burroughs Block building. That is, as far as I can see, exactly what I'm proposing here. The floor plates were demolished and the building was reconstructed and restored to the highest standards. I think it was beautifully done by the same development team. And it maintained its landmark status. It's still a City of Madison landmark according to the city website. I also believe the Yost building, which is part of the Overture Center, was a facade-dectomy, and it is still a City of Madison landmark. Regarding its being moved, there's a City of Madison landmark, Gates of Heaven, which is in James Madison Park. That was moved about 0.6 of a mile from its original location, or about 3,168 feet, before it was landmarked. And then the City of Madison landmarked it after it was moved. The plan is to move the Ohlson and Verhusen facade about 40 feet to the northwest. The context and setting will still be the same or similar to its original context and setting. It's on retail, an important retail block on the Capitol Square. So my question is, why was the Gates of Heaven designated a City of Madison landmark after being moved more than 3,000 feet, but we can't keep the landmark status for this property, keeping the context and moving it 40 feet? It would not meet the Secretary of Interior standards for a landmark. Well, they don't apply here. City standards can be more liberal. It's common practice for the local municipalities to apply a more liberal standards to their landmarks. By restoring the facade to the standards of the Secretary of the Interior and maintaining the landmark status, it would best be in the purview of the Landmarks Commission to follow this versus, the Urban Design Commission. So I think it's in the Landmarks Commission purview to follow through on how this is done if these are conditions of approval. In conclusion, let's make the best of it. Let's restore the facade to the Secretary of the Interior standards, follow city policy and precedent that they've used in the past on landmarks, keep the landmark status, and then figure out, once we've decided on the outcomes, how we can make this work. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Saludos. Do any commissioners, I see a hand already. Commissioner Kalashevsky. Hold on. Okay, Katie, there you go.
Yeah, I mostly have a point of order question for Heather. We are just voting on demolition of this building. We aren't voting on the design of the new building yet, correct? So, okay, so we can talk about the facade-ectomy later.
Yes.
Right. Also, the reason why the National Register allows the listing of buildings that have been moved if you want, I can share with you, but there is an entire bulletin on how that works. And you have to follow a certain procedure in order for a building to be moved and still be eligible. And typically it's only if the building is eligible for its architecture and or it is able to, even by moving it, it's able to keep a majority of its 7 signs of integrity. So that's a totally different matter, but just as a heads up, that's why that was able to still be listed.
Okay, thank you. I believe I saw Commissioner McLean. Did you have your hand? No. Okay. All right. Any other comments for Mr. Saludos or questions? Okay. Seeing none. Thank you very much, Alex. Okay, Ms. Bailey.
Jason Tisch, registered in support, wishing to speak.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I was going to make some of the same points that Alex made, but hearing Ms. Kalashevsky's comments about doing this sort of negotiation at a later meeting, that makes a lot of sense. I was wondering if it would make sense to condition demolition on a commitment from ULI to reconstruct that facade using Secretary of Interior standards for reconstruction. They in the proposal, ULI makes some commitment toward, and I was trying to pull up the language of their proposal, but I couldn't find it before I got on. So suffice it to say that ULI makes some commitment in their proposal to restoring or rebuilding that Ohlson facade. If it makes sense at this point to stipulate a commitment from ULI to do it according to the standards for reconstruction, that would be great to see. If there's an opportunity to do that at a later meeting under a different decision, a different COA for this project, that would be fine too. But I guess personally, I would like to see a commitment one way or the other from ULI to either do it according to the standards for reconstruction or reinterpret the design of the facade and not pretend that it's a reconstruction of a historic facade.
Ms. Bailey, I think there's a sort of process question here. Do you want to address anything? You don't have to. I'm just giving you the opportunity to respond.
So as part of the demolition, you have, I suppose, a range of options for conditions of approval of the demolition of the building. So you could add conditions related to the building materials that are located on the second story facade for 7 North Pinckney. You could decide that you don't want to do that now and you want to talk about it as part of the COA for the new construction. Both of those options are available to you.
Okay, thank you. Do any of the commissioners have any questions for Mr. Tisch? Okay, I see no raised hands. Thank you, Jason. All right, Ms. Bailey.
Mark Minkowski, registered in support of not wishing to speak, but available for questions. Kurt Stiggy, neither in support nor opposition, not wishing to speak, but available for questions and representing the Madison Trust for Historic Preservation. Those are the registrants that we have.
Okay. All right. Do any of the commissioners have further questions for any of the registrants, including some that have registered not wishing to speak, whose names you just heard? Okay, seeing no hands, I'm going to go ahead and, sorry. Alder Vivier, I see that you're here. I want to give you the opportunity before I close the public hearing if you want to speak.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, commissioners. I do want to just take a moment and thank you all very much for your support of the public interest variance at the last commission meeting. I think that this is rather straightforward tonight, what is before you. However, I have to admit that I have had several conversations in the last few weeks with Alex Salutos and also with Brad Benkowski about the issue of whether or not the landmark status of the Ohlson and Verhusen facade should be rescinded and the timing of that, and further the issue of whether or not Secretary of Interior standards should be required in the future construction. And obviously you've all just heard the testimony on all that. So I just want to say that it might be in order for a commissioner to ask Brad Benkowski a question as to whether or not they have any concerns with that, because I believe that they do not. So I don't believe that this is in controversy at this time. I totally appreciate that in terms of the process question is this evening the time to decide some of these things. We're not. But I just wanted to remind the commission first and foremost of my support of the public interest variance and thus support the motion that I presume will be before you momentarily in this regard. So thank you all for your service, and I'm happy to answer any questions and look forward to rejoining you at a future meeting as we discuss further issues related to this proposal. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. I was actually, you must have read my mind because I wanted to hear from Mr. Benkowski about his thoughts on preserving, I'm using that word in the vernacular meaning, doing something with salvage related to the historic facade.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Yep. Thank you. Let me say, our intent is to reconstruct this building to the highest standard, the building facade, to the highest standards, and make sure that it recaptures its original form to the greatest possible extent, and really again becomes an example of Madison's past that's going to live on into the future. So if the commission feels that a commitment to reconstructing it to the Department of the Interior standards is appropriate, we're happy to do that. Again, we're going to document it. We're going to do everything possible, to comply to the strictest possible standards. That being said, I do believe that it's necessary and appropriate to rescind the landmark status upon demolition, to have it, potentially relisted upon, completion, following again the staff's approval, following whichever standards of reconstruction you deem appropriate. So we've certainly done it before. We've done lots of historic landmark reconstruction, including most recently the Lannon Hale House. We intend to take our obligations and our commitment most seriously. So following reconstruction, if the Landmarks Commission would like to consider relisting it, I'm happy to do that. I don't want to complicate the approvals by adjacency, proximity, and some of the 200-foot limit issues that you heard Ms. Bailey speak about earlier. But if you'd like us to follow the Department of the Interior standards, we're more than happy to do so.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. All right, Commissioner McLean, I am trying to unmute you.
Thank you. I had a couple of questions for Brad regarding the demo, of course, because that is where we are right now. He had mentioned, I believe he had mentioned retaining original historic materials and details from the second floor up, my guess is. We haven't really talked specifically about which details and materials and whatnot. I think it's just always been assumed because that's what's left of the facade. But I do also have a question, more of a curiosity, I guess, looking at the photos and the new 1980s facade that's covering the old one, right? I am very curious when those panels start coming off, how much of the original building may actually be behind them, just looking at the way that they are juxtaposed away from the original facade of the building, almost to the depth that if you see the original pictures, to the depth of some of those end terracotta details are. So if anybody has any records of the original remodel from way back when, it may be known whether those were demolished during that remodel or maybe they were just covered. And I think when demolition happens, most likely will, as that comes apart, maybe photo document that as well, or possibly retain, salvage, save for the rebuild once the building goes back up. I guess maybe it's more of a statement than a question. I don't know.
I don't know. Mr. Vinkowski?
We certainly intend to extraordinarily carefully remove anything that's there right now to preserve everything and anything behind it. Our expectation is that there's not much there, but we would be wonderfully surprised if the portions of the original facade are still intact behind it. Our expectation is that, because companies like Ladding and McBean, who, have made terracotta for the last over, I think 120 or 140 years, can replicate, the terracotta detailing and coloring of the existing facade almost exactly. It's been done in New York and other cities in many situations, and we would expect that we would, take mold if it's not in place, that we would take molds and do our utmost to ensure that whatever we have to replace matches the original detailing to the greatest possible extent. Again, complying with the Department of the Interior standards to do that. But we certainly will photo document the removal. We're going to do it extremely carefully to make sure we preserve anything that's behind there. And it's going to be like unwrapping a box at Christmas. First you take off the bow and then you take off the paper and see what's inside. And we'll go at it just as carefully as we can.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, clarifications, specifically with regard to any of the applicants? If you have any other questions for the applicants or any of the registrants tonight. Okay, seeing none, I don't believe I closed the public hearing. If I did, I'm doing it again. So, all right, commissioners, I was looking at the staff recommendation, and the staff recommendation is to grant the COA with 3 conditions, which you heard about earlier, but I'd encourage you to read your staff report, even if that means toggling to another screen. We've also had some discussion here, and we could look to Ms. Bailey and ask her questions about if anyone wants to recommend any changes to those conditions in a motion, if anyone had any changes they wanted to suggest. And what I mean by that is talking specifically about what happens later, what needs to be saved, etc. She could probably help guide us through that if you have questions. So I will turn the floor over to you and entertain a motion, or we can have further discussion. Looking for a hand to wave of some sort. Okay, Commissioner Arneson.
Yeah, I guess I'll move approval with conditions as stated.
Okay, motion on the table to approve as written in the staff report. Okay, do I have a second on that motion? Okay, Alder Martin.
I'll second.
Okay, thank you. Further discussion. Commissioner McLean. Oops.
If I may add a friendly, and I know that's all, I think, assumed and understood, but if we are looking at the written recommendations from city staff with some specifics, you could add somehow in there as well that during demolition, as well as a photo documentation, that original historic materials be saved, collected, I guess marked so they can go back in original place when it gets reassembled. I know, I'm pretty sure they'll do it, but just to have it on record that those materials shall move forward to the new location.
Ms. Bailey, do you have any suggested language or that Mr. McLean did not include?
So I would say we could make a condition of approval of demolition that the applicant explore careful deconstruction of the facade of 7 North Pinckney, since that seems to be the one that we're focused on, for potential reincorporation into the new construction.
Does that capture it, David?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, and now I have to ask Commissioner Arneson if that's considered friendly, and Alder Martin. Okay, great. So we have a motion on the table. It says, I understand it, with the 3 conditions in the staff report plus a 4th condition. Is that correct, Ms. Bailey?
Yes.
Okay. Does anyone need Lauren to read back? Sorry, Lauren. Any part of that, or are we good to vote? Any further discussion, in other words? Okay. Seeing none, I am going to assume unanimous consent. If you object to this motion, please signify that by raising your hand so that I can see it in the comment box. Okay, seeing none, I'd like to record that that passes unanimously. Okay, great, thank you. And I assume we will see this again. So thank you to the Alder and to the applicants and the registrants on this item. Moving on, not so rapidly, but we are on item 5. Legistar 60541, a project at 300 East Gorham Street, an exterior alteration to a designated Madison landmark, the Gates of Heaven, for an exterior restoration project in the 2nd Aldermanic District. Ms. Bailey.
Okay, so up on the screen, we have a view of 300 East Gorham, also known as Gates of Heaven. Proposal is to clean soil masonry using the gentlest means possible, reverse or consolidate damaged masonry, and you got some pictures there of some of the masonry that is showing damage. Replace failed mortar with materials in kind to match the color, composition, and profile of the historic. Repair exterior doors and windows, and replacement of exterior storm windows. For history of the property, the synagogue was constructed in 1863. It was moved to James Madison Park in 1971. It is of the Romanesque Revival style. It was designated as a city landmark, both for its architecture and for its connection with Madison's early Jewish community. Ethical standards, city landmarks are required to comply with Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation. In particular, we're looking at standards 5, 6, and 7. There are going to be some chemical and physical treatments that will not include sandblasting. The proposal is for using the gentlest means possible for cleaning, but also using some treatments for reconsolidating where it is not possible to reverse the particular stone to get a surface that is less damaged. And any deteriorated features will be repaired if possible, or reconstructed and replicated in kind. And any distinctive features and materials shall be preserved. So staff believes that the standards for granting a certificate of appropriateness are met and recommends the Landmarks Commission approve the project as proposed. Oh, Anna, you are muted.
I muted myself, so didn't hear me cough. All right. This is not a public hearing item, so we'll move straight to registrants on this item. And I believe we have a familiar one to start.
So there is one registrant, that is Amy Scanlon, with the City of Madison, here to speak on behalf of the project.
Amy.
Hi, everybody. Thanks. Engineering has been working with Insight Consulting Architects to develop best practices for the Gates of Heaven exterior restoration project. During that relocation effort in 1971, we know that many historic elements were removed. And so we are doing everything we can to preserve the historic fabric that does remain. So as Ms. Bailey explained, the brick will be repointed, the stone will be repaired and repointed, but I wanted to make sure you knew we were trying to remove deteriorated stone and redress it, or remove it and flip it around in its existing opening and put it back so that the historic fabric remains. In addition, we believe the windows date to the 19-teens, 1920s, and we plan to restore them since they are in repairable condition and are historic in their own right. And then once restored, we want to protect them all by installing storm windows on every opening. Right now, they're just storm windows on a couple. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Scanlon. Do any commissioners have any questions for Ms. Scanlon? Okay. Seeing none. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you.
Ms. Bailey. Do we have any other registrants on this?
She was the only registrant.
Okay, wonderful. All right, commissioners, I think you've heard about the staff recommendation and from Ms. Scanlon. So unless there's further discussion, I will entertain a motion on this item. Alder Martin.
Is that, yeah. Hello?
Yeah, it's good.
I move approval.
Great. Commissioner McLean, I think, was next. Okay, David, you're on.
Oh, second, sorry.
Okay.
I spoke too soon.
A motion to adopt the staff recommendation that's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Ms. Kalashevsky.
No, I was just going to second.
Okay, great.
Sorry, I forgot to put my hand.
Okay, any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to assume unanimous consent. Are there any objections? Okay, seeing none, this item is approved unanimously. Thank you, Ms. Scanlon, and thanks to city staff for their preservation and restoration efforts on this important landmark in the city of Madison. Okay, moving on. Item 6, Legistar 60542, a project exterior alteration at 1311 Jennifer Street in the Third Lake Ridge Historic District, the 6th Aldermanic District, involving construction of a new front porch and replacement of 5 windows. Ms. Bailey?
Certainly. So up on the screen is a Google Street View of the property in question. So proposal is to construct a new front porch and replace 5 windows on the first floor. What you have up here on the screen are the location of the windows in question. 2 of them are on the street facade of the building, and of course Third Lake Ridge places particular emphasis on street facades. For history of the property, the principal building was constructed in 1887, and it originally had a single-story porch across the front. This is also pulling from the 1908 Sanborn map. And you can see everybody there in the vicinity also had front porches, almost all of them spanning the front of the building, and a lot of them are currently gone. So for visual compatibility, on the right-hand side of this slide, you have the visually compatible study area that staff supplied to the applicant and looking at historic resources within 200 feet of the subject property. Most of the buildings in the vicinity had more typical Victorian style porches. There's one property, 1315 Spate, that had, and that's the picture you have up there, that had a more sort of vernacular craftsman style porch. That type of change would have happened within the period of significance for the district. So it's a little out of character with what is essentially a folk Victorian building, but it is in character with the district and it is in character with one of the porches in the vicinity. That particular porch at 1315 Spate, I think it's 2 years ago, there was a certificate of appropriateness for reconstructing it. So there has been some work on that porch recently, but it was reconstructing it to look exactly as it had been. So this porch is something that has historically been in the district for approximately a century at this point. For applicable standards relating to the windows, there's 41.181 for the standards for a certificate of appropriateness. And for window replacement applications, we generally look at the standard for frustrating the public interest. That retention of historic building fabric where possible is in the interest of the Historic Preservation Ordinance. And that is reflected in the adopted process per the Landmarks Commission Policy Manual for reviewing window replacement proposals. There's also the Third Lake Range standards for exterior alterations for residential properties. And one of those standards that this proposal would be in conflict with is alterations of street facades of any existing structure shall retain the original existing historic materials. For standards for the porch, we're looking at the variety of resources. So visually compatible with height, and this is a single-story porch as proposed, and the height is in keeping with other single-story porches. Landscape treatment, it would be located so that it would be, of course, out in front of the building, but also spanning across the primary facade. Rhythm of mass and spaces, it would be in keeping with the other historic resources and also bring it back to more of its historic character. The next standard is looking at retaining the original or existing historical proportion of the rhythm of solids and voids. By reintroducing a front porch to this property, it will go back to the original rhythm. And for alterations to street facades, existing historical materials on the street facade are not proposed to be removed. This would be about introducing a new element that is based upon some historic precedent in the vicinity. And that final standard is really talking about contemplation of alteration to the existing roof of the primary structure. And there is going to be a roof on the porch, and the style of roof would be in keeping with the style of single-story porches on historic resources within 200 feet. So staff recommendations, staff believes that the standards for granting a certificate of appropriateness could be met and recommends the Landmarks Commission approve the proposal with the following conditions. Approval of the porch design as proposed, but also rehabilitation of the 5 historic windows. In the application, the applicant talks about that the windows on the back of the house had previously been rehabilitated and repaired. And it appears from the submittal that these windows are repairable. They need some attention. They need to be rehabilitated. The applicant in the recent submittal of information was looking at the economic feasibility and saying that the replacement materials, which are appropriate replacements if the Landmarks Commission decides to approve replacements, the custom-made wood windows would replicate the existing, but that is much more economical than a repair of the existing windows.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, great. So I think we are on to registrants on this item.
So there is one registrant, Valerie Kozel, who is in support and here to represent the project.
Great, thank you.
Thanks very much. I'm the property owner I think the porch is a lovely idea. We're very keen to go ahead with that. In terms of the windows, I would love to rehabilitate the windows. I had Gabriel Acton, a licensed contractor who's done a lot of this kind of rehabilitation work to look at the windows, and he estimates the cost to be somewhere between $600 and $1,000 a window. They're old, they're beat up, the pulleys are gone, the ropes are gone, the spaces have been filled, so it would be a fairly expensive process to rehabilitate, and frankly, probably beyond my financial means. The replacements, which are consistent with replacements that we already have upstairs, would be about 50 to 60% of those costs. So I do hope we can go ahead with replacements. If not, we'll just live with what we have. But I don't think I don't think we'll be able to actually contract with someone to rehabilitate those windows. But I do appreciate the advice. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Kozel. Do any of the commissioners have any questions for the property owner? We talk about windows a lot, so I'm waiting for just a second. Okay. Commissioner McLean.
Curious what windows are proposed for the replacement. And I asked because $600 to $1,000 doesn't seem that unreasonable. Actually, it seems even kind of cheap for new windows of that size. So at $600 to $1,000 for rehabilitation, I thought it was actually a deal relative to a new purchase. So I'm curious what the replacement windows are.
Per the application materials, and Valerie can speak to this as well, they're proposing Marvin wood inserts. And these are simple 1/1 windows, but they would be replicating the existing windows exactly.
And the upstairs in the front, those were replaced already, did I hear? Is that correct?
I'm muted. Am I okay? Yeah, yes. There are windows upstairs, 2 in the front and 2 in the back that have been replaced with Marvin inserts. So we're not proposing to replace the external trim. We'll keep the external trim the same. It's just replacing the inserts, and the cost estimates on that is somewhere between $450 and $550 per insert installed. So again, we're not replacing the full windows. We're not replacing the external trim, just the inserts.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. So the front facade looks like there's a real thin vertical mutton bar in both the upper and lower lights, and that's the replacement window?
That's correct. Yes, that's correct. The upstairs 2 windows in front are replacement windows, the Marvin replacements.
And will the first 4 windows have the same vertical mutton bar in each light?
That remains to be determined. We have 2 windows on the side. 2 of the windows on the side do have those mutton bars. So I would go ahead with those mutton bars. I like them. I don't think the front 2 windows are original. I think they probably initially had mutton bars, but have been replaced over time. But I don't know. I just bought the house a year ago, so I don't have a full history on it.
Ms. Bailey, did you have anything? Go ahead.
I would say historically, at that period in time, larger amounts of glass would have been more expensive. And so it is more likely that what we think of as just a simple 1/1 window, that would be the more expensive type of window. And properties were more likely to have that on the front and at pedestrian level where people could see it, because that's where you would show the amount of money that you had. That doesn't mean that that's what originally was there. But from looking at the images, while those windows, we don't know if they are original, they certainly look like they are historic. They've been there a long time.
The first floor ones you're talking about.
The first floor windows at the ground floor.
And those are just simple simple. There's 1/1s.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes, that's correct. They're just simple 1/1s.
Okay. All right. Anything else, David?
No.
Okay. All right. Any other questions from the commissioners, specifically for the applicant? Okay, Ms. Kozel, I'd remain on the line. I think in the course of our discussion, there may be further questions that come up.
Great. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, commissioners. So we have the staff recommendation in front of us with a couple of elements, the porch and the replacement windows. So we can take those in turn or vote on them according to the staff recommendation, which encompasses both of them. So I will leave it to you. So I will entertain a motion, or we could have further discussion. Maybe we start with some discussion. So in the staff report, which is not in front of me at present, but I'm going to open it up. I will also simply point to the fact that we have the district standard, which we know well for Third Lake Ridge, 41.23. We have the certificate of appropriateness standards. We also have the Wisconsin statute, which I will not read the number. So as you're considering your motion, please refer to specific parts of the relevant ordinances or statutes. See how I filled dead air by suggesting ways that we move motions along. Okay, Ms. Kalashevsky. All right. Katie, you're good to go.
Yeah. I'm fine with the porch. It's not my favorite, but going by the standards, it's fine. I am curious if other commissioners think we have enough. Typically, we ask for more to see the replacement of windows. I'm curious if other commissioners feel the same.
Thank you. Commissioner Arneson. Okay.
I guess I was just, I'm kind of on the fence on the windows. The sash inserts are nice and they don't, destroy the exterior windows. On the other hand, that are the trim window surround. These don't seem to be in particularly bad shape. So I'm kind of on the fence. We've certainly sent people back to, in other circumstances to demonstrate irreparability of windows, and these, just from what we've seen, unless there's information that we don't have, but maybe that's reflective, Dave, of the relatively inexpensive price to fix them. So maybe they're not in that bad a shape.
Okay.
But I don't feel super strongly about it either way.
All right. Thank you. Ms. Bailey, did you want to say anything about the inserts as opposed to the whole window replacement, and anything about that relative to the standards, just to keep us moving along?
Sure. So usually when you're talking about a window, you're talking about the whole window frame and then the sashes. And this is just talking about the sashes. So the window frame itself would remain, but we're talking about the glass. We're talking about the frame of the sash.
And do you know, have we approved others like this in this district or in recent memory that you know of? Not that we have precedence in historic preservation. I know that. I'm just trying to give context for.
So we've been holding with this particular standard since my time here with the commission. So that has been our precedent for looking at, are the windows deteriorated beyond repair, or is the repair of the windows such that it seems economically unreasonable? And for these windows, they appear to be repairable, not in such a deteriorated condition that the amount of intervention would be economically, again, unreasonable. As the Commissioner McLean said, the price quoted for the repair is actually very reasonable for windows that we're seeing in Madison.
Okay, thank you. Anything else from members of the commission on this item? Windows are complicated, which is why we spend so much time talking about them. I think it's worth pointing out, as Mr. Arneson said, we usually have a fairly strict standard, but in terms of what we ask for and see to determine that they're beyond repair. So that's something to consider. Commissioner Arneson.
Well, just following up with that, I mean, with the numbers, I guess that we were presented. I mean, if you take the high end of the Marvin sashes and the low end of the repair, they're within $50 of each other per window, which I don't, I guess I don't think that meets the financial, hardship test. So I guess unless there's further discussion, I would move approval on the porch and deny number 2 replacements, or give the applicant the opportunity to demonstrate additional disrepair or present other information at a future date that we don't have.
Okay, so the staff recommendation is to approve the porch as proposed. I think it might be easiest just to separate these, but for purposes of speeding us along. So we'll take that first motion by Mr. Arneson to approve the porch following the staff recommendation. Do I have a second on that? Alder Martin.
I will second.
Thank you. Any further discussion on the porch? Commissioner McLean, did you have anything on the porch?
Just looking at some of the details at the lower skirting, I guess. I don't know, whatever you want to call it. I guess if I may ask, Ms. Bailey, through your conversations with the applicant, if you have already gone through a lot of those porch details and such and kind of worked together to get where we are now?
Yes, we have been discussing the porch.
Okay, then I'm fine.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we have a motion on the table that has been seconded to approve the porch as described in the application materials and worked on with city staff. Any further comments? Trying to mute people as we go here. Okay. All right. Seeing no further comments, I'm going to assume unanimous consent on the porch. If there are any objections, please raise your hand now. All right. Seeing none, then we want to move on. I will unmute Mr. Arneson. The staff report, the second condition is to work on, the recommendation is to rehabilitate the 5 historic windows, but you were suggesting.
Well, perhaps I should just recommend approval of that too. And the applicant can repair them if she chooses or not, or does it preclude her coming back with additional information to request replacement again, should there be more information?
Ms. Bailey, do you have any guidance to help us?
Sure. So if the applicant is able to provide documentation showing that the windows are deteriorated beyond repair, I think we consider that a substantially different application in terms of it's providing substantially different information about the condition of the windows. And so we could take that as a new application just addressing the windows.
Even though we may approve the motion to repair them here.
Yes. So you're making the motion based on the information that we have. If they come in with substantially different information, I think we can consider that enough of a difference to consider it a new application.
Could I suggest an alternative, which might be simply to refer this item? Would that be an alternative as well?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So, Mr. Arneson, balls in.
But if we refer it, then she can't rehabilitate the windows without coming back.
So actually, the rehabilitation of the windows, I could approve administratively. That is a level of approval that staff can approve administratively.
Okay, so let's refer.
We don't do anything. Go ahead, Rich.
Well, I was going to agree with you to say let's refer number 2 to a later date. Or
pending additional documentation?
Right.
Okay, so we have a motion to refer the replacement to a later date, pending additional documentation. Commissioner McLean.
Second.
Okay, is there any further discussion here? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to assume unanimous consent on referral of this item. Right? Okay. Any objections, please signify by raising your hand. Joe, I'm having some weird stuff going on my side of the technology here. That's why I'm pausing. So I'm not able to lower hands and stuff. So that's why I'm pausing. Okay. So we have approval of the porch and we may see the windows back. Is that correct? Ms. Bailey, is there anything you want to explain beyond this to the applicant?
No, we will be in touch shortly, either tomorrow or the day after that, with your certificate of appropriateness for the porch. And we can certainly talk about the windows if you have additional questions.
Ms. Kozel, are you still on the line?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I am. Thanks very much. We will probably come back on the windows. In the last couple months, it's been difficult to have someone in to really do a careful assessment, and I did a poor job of documenting, I think, the current state of the windows. But let's revisit that. Thanks very much for your motion on the porch, and we'll look forward to talking again. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. All right. We made it through those. We're on to regular business, everybody, and it's 7:06. So, without further ado, the Secretary's report.
So, for tentative meeting schedule, I wanted to let you know that we are still doing the every 4 to 6 weeks, asking for that we have an emergency meeting. So we're asking the mayor's office if we can have a meeting at least once a month. And that is the way we are continuing to proceed until we hear otherwise. And so what we said with the previous agenda item is we have received approval for a July 13th meeting, and that will be a virtual meeting. And I expect that to be the way we continue to operate for quite some time.
Okay, I would ask, follow up on that, I would ask commissioners to please pencil in July 13th on your calendar. As the restrictions are lifted by the city, and I know that people might be traveling to an extent, it's a virtual meeting. Hopefully everyone can make it, but we need to be very attentive to quorum issues at this time. So please mark this in your calendars.
Okay. My second item is the Historic Preservation Plan was adopted on May 19th by the Common Council. Yay! Needless to say, given the circumstances, we didn't have the big celebration related to that we were hoping, but we got some good press. I also did an interview on WORT, and there seems to be a lot of excitement related to the plan. So hopefully we'll be able to start implementing some of those recommendations. And you say there's lots of really great ideas and lots of enthusiasm. And now, of course, there's absolutely no money to pull those things off. But one of the things that we did with the plan was that there was an emphasis on collaboration and working with community partners. And I think that the current financial circumstances just emphasize that is the way that we proceed. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. So, yay.
Yes, and I really want to give a shout out to Ms. Bailey and all of the individuals that helped on the Historic Preservation Plan. I do hope that at the appropriate point we can get together to celebrate, because it really is a great undertaking, and I really appreciated the good press that we got. And so thank you, Ms. Bailey and Lauren and everyone else that worked on the plan. So
it was a massive team effort. So yeah, it was encouraging for me to be a part of the team of folks that helped make this happen.
Wonderful. Okay. Moving on to, I believe, our last item of business, buildings proposed for demolition. Ms. Bailey, I think you have a report for us.
Sure. So I'll please remind me that there is a registrant for this.
Okay. I'll try.
It's not part of my normal pattern, so I'm worried I might forget.
Not wishing to speak, though.
Not wishing to speak, but something to bring up. So up on the screen, you should have the demolition report. So 817 Williamson, we've already approved the certificate of appropriateness for that. I'm having a staff recommendation of a finding of A, no known historic value.
Do you want to move on these one by one?
Yes, because after this, they get more complicated.
Okay, and which item is the registrant on, please?
So the registration is just for this overall agenda item in opposition, and I don't have any additional information about, but let me just go over to the registration. Well, let me stop sharing the screen while I do that. So Dr. Carolyn Frywald is registered in opposition, not wishing to speak. And that is the sum total of the information that I have. I don't know specifically what the opposition is in relation to.
Is she with us?
No, she is not present.
Okay, so
does not look like I have any emails. So
okay.
that is the information as I have it.
Okay, thank you. All right, if we could go back to yes, sharing of the screen. So this is for the building at 817 Williamson Street. The recommendation is no known historic value. I'm going to try to look for motions as quickly as I can. Please bear with me. So do I have a motion on this item for this demolition? Commissioner McLean.
Move approve a certificate of appropriateness for demolition for whatever, not offering certificates. Never mind. A, that's what I'm looking for.
No known historic value. Wonderful. Thank you. Do I have a second on this? Again, please use the raise your hand function. Mr. Arneson.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion of this item? Seeing none, I will assume unanimous consent of a finding of no known historic value for the property at 817 Williamson Street. Are there any objections? There are none. Ms. Bailey.
So moving on, there's a slate of buildings, 202 to 208, 210, and 212 South Baldwin Street. This is a proposed demolition from City of Madison Parks Division, and they are proposing to expand McPike Park. The site would be converted to turf. This was the site of the former location for two different lumber businesses, and in between those two lumber businesses, the property is owned by the Chicago and Northwestern Railroad. So for 202 to 208 South Baldwin Street, this is a series of early tractee buildings. And so you have the aerial where you can get the overall roof form, and there's some shed roof extensions there on the left-hand side, or what would be the west side of the buildings. So they're sited parallel to the former railroad spur and the existing rail line. They first appear on the 1950 Sanborn and also in a 1955 aerial. And I've got that aerial there, and it's there's not a lot of detail that you can see there in the aerial. It looks like these were likely constructed by the railroad on this particular site. For 202, there's no construction date. So you've got the little marker that shows you which building. There used to be a railroad spur that was in between the tractees and this building. It appears in a 1937 aerial. 1942, Sanborn identifies it as an A and W hoe. A on Sanborns usually means auto, and the W hoe usually means warehouse. And given that you see there's, looks like there was a former vehicle door there on the gable end of the building. I think this was all this was part of a bulk oil station for the railroad. And so you can see that I tilted the excerpt from the Sanborn map there to show where it was in relation to the existing and the historic. I think this was served the bulk oil station, but it was also where the vehicles that serviced the railroad by driving on the road as opposed to on the tracks would come in and service the oil station. So 212 South Baldwin Street was constructed in 1910 per the assessor record, but it shows up on the 1908 Sanborn, so I'm guessing it was constructed earlier than 1910. And it shows up as the office and scales for Conklin and Sons, Coal and Wood. And by 1950 on the Sanborn, it shows up as the office for the Lumberman Supply Building. So you could talk about each of these buildings individually or vote on them as a group.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Bailey. Lots of information there. Commissioners, you can either comment or I will entertain a motion on one or all of these. So to refresh, we can make a finding of no known historic value. If we do a finding of B or C, the Plan Commission has requested that we speak specifically to what we are finding, especially with regards to B. So as you consider a motion or prepare your comment, please speak. If you are speaking to B or C, please be as specific as you can.
If I could interject a staff recommendation, I would recommend a finding of B for these properties are related to the vernacular context of Madison's built environment, particularly to the more industrial railroad heritage. We don't have a lot of properties that are able to convey that particular history. It's not the pretty railroad related history. People tend to look at the passenger depots for that. This is a much more functional type of resource. And we don't have a lot of that left. The buildings themselves retain integrity to be able to convey those historic associations, and then their orientation related to both the existing rail line and the former spur that ran in between two of those sets of buildings. So they are, to a certain extent, a rare remaining resource, but I don't think they necessarily reach the level of significance for a finding of C.
Ms. Bailey, I'm sort of teetering on a line here. I mean, I think you made a case, and I'll let the other commissioners speak to this, for these under B. I'm wondering if we can even be more specific by way of guidance for the Plan Commission about what could be done in a case of B, i.e. photographic documentation is recommended or something to that effect.
Yes, you certainly could recommend, because I mean, we've done that with other ones for that they recommend exploring salvage or relocation. Okay. Or you could ask for documentation. Again, because this is a rare remaining resource. These properties were not included in previous surveys of the area. And so we don't have information. What I presented in my staff presentation there were items I pulled together from the historic aerials and Sanborn maps. But we don't have documentation related to the history of these properties.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Arneson.
Well, I was going to say B, yeah, and then for all the reasons that Heather mentioned, and I would make a motion to document and also explore possible salvage, especially for the Chalky buildings, although it does look like, somebody, I mean, I wouldn't expect that all those little red doors that were cut into them were original. Those done for self-storage units or something, I would think. But regardless, I think motion B for all of them.
Okay, so I will take that as a motion. Thank you. Ms. Kalszewski. Okay, Katie, I think if you do it on your end. There we go.
I was also going to say that I agree with Heather that these are B for all of the same reasons.
Okay, so I'll take that as a second for B. Any further comments now that we have a motion that has been made and seconded? And as I understand the motion, and Rich or Katie can correct me if I'm wrong, we're recommending B on the basis of historic value related to Madison's industrial character, with a strong recommendation to look into documenting for the city, I'm thinking, and the buildings before they are demolished, and a strong recommendation to salvage or relocate. Am I correct, Rich and Katie, in understanding your intent? I see Rich. Now I see Katie. Okay. Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to assume unanimous consent for B on the properties on Baldwin Street. Are there any objections? Okay, seeing none. Ms. Bailey, thank you.
Okay, so the final item, and I think the most complicated. So we are looking at 504 to 516 West Washington Ave and 8 through 14 North Bassett Street for a proposed redevelopment that would be a substantial, I can't remember if this is mixed use or strictly residential. I suspect that it's mixed use. It's mixed use. So of the properties, I only have preservation files on 3 of these. All the rest of them, I have no preservation file. The state doesn't have documentation either. So of the 3 that I do have documentation on, 510 West Washington, constructed in 1905. It's a Claude and Stark design. On the other hand, it is one of many Claude and Starks that we still have in the city. 10 North Bassett, constructed in 1899 for Jacob Niederer, who was a bakery truck driver. 14 North Bassett, constructed 1894 for Louis Rosen, who was a steam fitter. I think what we have here are a collection of buildings that have had a variety of interventions over time. They speak to a period of time where working class professionals were able to afford residences of this style. This speaks to a certain period of time with the middle class and working class being able to construct buildings of this size. This certainly wasn't always the case. And so it does bear a particular, it speaks to a part of our history, but we have limited documentation and information related to these properties. So again, you can talk about these individually, you can talk about them as a group. Similarly to my other recommendation, my staff recommendation would be a finding of B, that these are related to the vernacular context of Madison's built environment. They are representative as a group to the turn of the century development of Madison and the working class and middle class neighborhoods that were constructed at that time.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Bailey. I'd keep up the PowerPoint just in case anyone wants to see anything again, please. All right, commissioners, again, as you consider motions or comments on these buildings on West Washington and North Bassett, I would urge you to be specific, especially if we're in the B and C categories, please, as to your thinking. Okay, Ms. Kalashevsky.
First, I have a question for Heather. How close is this to the west, that district or potential district we talked about that we talked about earlier this year that was off of West Washington? I don't remember if it was an earlier district or if it was part of the preservation survey that was done by Legacy, but I feel like there was something over here.
I'm not familiar with a potential district. This is, I would say, a little bit down the road. While it's little more than a block away from some landmark buildings. The depot being one of them. And so there are some landmarks in the vicinity, but we do not have a potential, we have not identified a potential district in this location. You might be thinking about the Mifflandia plan, though.
Yes, I think that's what I'm thinking about.
So the Mifflandia plan, the proposal that will be coming into Plan Commission is following the recommendations of the Mifflandia plan. And so the proposed redevelopment is in line with the recommendations of that plan. Mifflandia was looking at this vicinity, but it wasn't recommending that the area necessarily be designated either as a conservation district or as a local historic district. It was looking at ways for doing sensitive infill.
Okay. Well, I'm also just going to go back to my comments from the last one. And the last time we had something like this, and the last time we had something like this, and the last time we had something like this, which is that we're slowly allowing developers to take these small vernacular areas and turn them into one big building. So it is at least a B. Obviously, I don't think that any of these rise to the level of C, but this is getting frustrating, honestly.
So I'm going to push you a bit, if you don't mind, Katie.
Yeah.
So obviously, if you were talking about B, you would be talking about the vernacular context.
Mm-hmm.
But you spoke of single buildings. I mean, overall, there's a loss of integrity to quite a few of these, right? But
yes,
at the same time, what you're saying, I think, is that as a group, the collection of them is what makes them significant.
Yeah, I would argue that they don't necessarily rise individually as landmarks by themselves. However, we're slowly taking these nodes of small vernacular houses and okaying their demolition. They may not have they may not retain their architectural significance individually, but they still generally retain integrity, or you could argue that they could retain integrity as a group without looking at them closer. It's hard to argue that 10 buildings are a district? Are they 10 buildings?
And I think it's also worth noting, as Ms. Bailey said, there's not a lot of information on these. We don't know. We're looking at those for the most part. So any other comments? I believe I'm going to take that and that language as a motion in the interest of moving us along for B. Okay. Do I have a second on that motion? Commissioner McLean.
Second, please.
Thank you. All right. Is there any further discussion on a recommendation of B with the terms that were talked about by Ms. Kalashewski? All right, seeing none, I'm going to assume, unanimous consent on this item. Are there any objections? Okay, seeing none, this passes with a recommendation of B. And Ms. Bailey, do you need any clarification for the Plan Commission, or is that strong enough?
I think we have the information that we need. Thank you.
Okay, great. I believe I didn't quite make 7, but I made 7:30. We're at the end of our agenda. Ms. Bailey, do we have anything else in terms of future meetings or anything that the Commission should know besides July 13th?
Not that I am currently aware of.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for your patience. We are going to be using a consent agenda, which may, if we have non-controversial items, as we often do, may move us along a little bit. And I really appreciate everybody's support of that. And in the meantime, I wish you well. I wish everyone to stay safe as you need to do so. And hopefully when I see you again in person, the memories of what's going on right now in our world will be a distant memory. Certainly not resolved, but be a distant memory. So Thank you very much also to the tech staff facilitating it today. I really appreciate it. I think it worked.
Thank you.
And with that, I'm frozen. Okay.
Bye.